In 1275, Marco Polo walked into Peking. He saw something no European had ever seen. Trees being soaked, trees being pressed, trees being turned into wealth. Weimar, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. 3 modern names, one ancient one. The first happened 700 years before the others. The man who recorded it was a merchant from Venice. What he described is what every wallet on Earth now carries. This is the origin story. Peking, 1275. A 21-year-old Venetian merchant arrived carrying letters from the Pope. He stayed 17 years. He went home the long way, landed in a prison, and wrote a book. The book described what Europe couldn't believe. For 700 years, Europe called him a liar. The story didn't start with Marco. It started with his father. In the 1260s, 2 Venetian brothers, Niccolò and Maffeo Polo, went east on business, from Venice to Constantinople, from Constantinople to Crimea, from Crimea to Russia, from Russia into Central Asia, 3 years on the road. In Central Asia, they joined an envoy bound for the Mongol court. In 1266, they reached Kublai Khan. They came home 3 years later. They came home with a report. Paper treated as money. Salt worth its weight in gold. Granaries the size of cities. The way the Mongols ran their economy, Venice had no imagination for. The details the Polo brothers described, Venice had no use for. The only record of what the brothers saw is what the son would write 3 decades later in a prison cell. The brothers went back 3 years later. They took Niccolò's son. Marco was 17. His inheritance, a story Europe hadn't believed. The return journey took another 3 years. In 1275, Marco Polo arrived at Kublai's court. Kublai's empire ran from the Pacific to the Volga. One law, one ruler, one money. The money was the puzzle Marco couldn't stop describing. Mulberry bark, soaked, pressed, stamped in red ink, treated as money. He wrote down what he saw. He wrote down what the law was, in Marco's own words. And nobody, however important he may think himself, dares to refuse them on pain of death. That is not a Mongol legal decree. That is a Venetian merchant's eyewitness account. He saw it. He recorded it. Nobody in Venice believed him. Trees being turned into wealth. That is what Marco was watching. The alchemy was not in the trees. The alchemy was in the law. Each note was stamped with the Khan's seal. Each printed in a script no one could forge. The script was security. The seal was the law. The paper was the promise. Why did Kublai need any of this? His empire stretched from China to Russia. Copper was too heavy to carry. Silver was too scarce to circulate. Only paper could travel everywhere. How did the state enforce the paper money? It tied the money to salt. Salt was what the empire ate. Every household needed it. The state owned every grain. Every grain of salt must be traded for salt coupons. Every coupon must be bought with paper notes. Salt drove coupons. Coupons drove notes. The wheel turned. 700 years later, America tied its money to oil. The wheel still turns. Marco Polo left in 1292, 17 years in Asia. He went home. He never came back. 2 years later, Kublai died. The Mongols were always at war. The state always needed money. The presses always printed. During Kublai's reign, one paper note bought a sack of rice. 2 decades later, you needed 5 notes for the same sack. A decade after, you needed 25. 50 years after Kublai's death, 150 notes for the same sack. After that, the record stops keeping count. You can't measure a thing that already became air. By the 1350s, under the last Mongol emperor, the empire tried a last-ditch gamble. New notes, new promises. The notes were thinner. The promises were even thinner. By then, the empire was engulfed in peasant rebellions. Millions rose up. The empire needed money to fight the rebels. The new notes kept printing, just as the old had. The new notes became worthless, just as the old had. The empire printed itself into bankruptcy. A decade later, the empire fell. The paper fell with it. Trees being turned into wealth. Wealth turned back into worthless paper. Marco Polo didn't live to see this ending. Neither did he see what came after. Weimar, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. Marco Polo got home in 1295. Europe read his book. Europe called him a liar. Same dismissal his father had carried. He spent the next 30 years in Venice. The book sat on his shelf. Europe sat on its verdict. He died in 1324. On his deathbed, friends and family urged him to recant the lies. He answered, "I have not told half of what I saw." He saw it. He recorded it. He was called a liar. He thought he was watching a miracle of statecraft. He was watching the birth of paper money. What he wrote outlived him by 700 years. It lives in every wallet on Earth today. Paper money backed by the state is not a myth. It is the norm. You carry Marco Polo's record in your pocket. Kublai had salt. America has oil. Different empires, same rule book. The merchant from Venice died called a liar, and on paper, he was right. There's a postscript. 80 years after Kublai died, a rebel army sacked the imperial capital. The rebel leaders, salt smugglers, the men who defied the salt monopoly that propped up the paper money. They founded a new dynasty on the wreckage of the old. It copied the same paper money trick. It failed even faster. But that is not the story. The real story. The rebels who buried the empire revived the empire's old trick. Weimar, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. Which country's money is next to fall? Let us know in comments. Subscribe to The Silk Ledger. We're auditing history, one chapter at a time.